Our first speaker is Dr. Bonnie HALPERN-FELSHER, PhD, FSAHM. I almost got that wrong. It's a mouthful. Um, she is a developmental psychologist in the Division of Adolescent Medicine, Department of Pediatrics at Stanford University. She is the founder and executive director of the Tobacco Prevention Toolkit, the Cannabis Awareness and Prevention Toolkit, and the Vaping Information Solutions and Interventions Toolkit. That is just a super brief bio of all the incredible things that she has done and is currently doing. And so with that, I will pass it over to Dr. HALPERN-FELSHER.
Thank you so much for that introduction. And hello, everyone. Hopefully, I'm doing correctly. We're good on sharing. All right. Well, good evening. Thank you all for being here and taking the time to listen. It's incredibly important. And I love what was said earlier about not blaming yourself, really taking the time to listen and process. And I'll talk a little bit about the end about what you parents or caregivers or other adults, some of the things that you might be able to do. In about 45, 50 minutes, I'm not going to do deep dive into everything. It's going to be kind of an overview of a lot. If anybody is interested in more information, papers, anything, at the end, I will give you my email as well as a bunch of resources. All right, so let's talk. We're going to talk about Just Say No, KNOW, and that is done purposely. You will see throughout, just say no, NO is not the most effective way to talk to our teens or our children overall. So let's help them get knowledge, but let's start first by helping you learn about this. And by the way, FSAHM is Sam, Fellow of the Society for Adolescent Health and Medicine, in case anybody was wondering. All right. So I'm the founder and director of the REACH Lab. REACH stands for Research and Education to Empower Adolescents and Young Adults to Choose Health. And in my lab, we do everything from research to translating the research to prevention and intervention programs, and as well as to informing policy at the city, state, and federal level. I'm not going to read all these names, I promise, but I have a wonderful lab. And the reason why I show this is to show that it's a diverse lab in many, many ways, including discipline. So we have researchers, public health folks, a public health lawyer who's part-time in the lab, a lot of educators because we develop education curriculums. We have a psychiatrist and an adolescent medicine physician who work with us part-time as well. And the REACH Lab also is supported by some wonderful youth. So we have youth between the ages of 14 and 22. And those youth, we have 35 young people across the country, actually across the globe. We have a couple people from other countries who work with us in everything that we do. And it's so important, just like you're going to hear from the youth today, because the youth are the ones who say, oh, Dr. Bonnie, that's so yesterday. That's not what's really happening today, and keep us current and keep us honest. And I also want to give a shout out to my funders. I also realize I don't have a slide on it, but I do always want to make sure that I do give my personal disclosure, which is I have been an expert witness in litigation against some e-cigarette companies. You probably could figure out which one. And I also have been, as I said, an expert scientist in city, state, and federal level policies. So today we're going to understand, help you understand and recognize different forms of tobacco and cannabis. I'm going to be pinging back and forth between those two products for the most part. Want to make sure you understand the harms associated with the use of these different products, and then end with tools and talking points that you can use. All right, so let's get started. Let's talk about tobacco and nicotine products. I'm going to be using these pretty interchangeably because most nicotine is derived from tobacco. We do have synthetic nicotine now, but most of the time the nicotine is derived from tobacco plants. So I will be using these terms fairly interchangeably. So I'm not really going to talk about cigarettes tonight because we're not seeing a lot of cigarette use, although we are starting to see a little uptick in cigarette use in different cities and states I've been talking to. But really, when we're talking about young people, adolescents and young adults, we're thinking mostly about nicotine e-cigarettes. Some people call them vaping or vape pens. I'm going to mostly call them e-cigarettes because they really aren't that different from cigarettes in a lot of ways. I'll talk about that more, but also they're not vapes. They're actually aerosols. So what comes out of that big plume of smoke is really aerosol, not vape. And so that's why I call them e-cigarettes. But I will say when I talk to teens, I do tend to say vapes because that's what they call them. All right. So you see here all different kinds of shapes and sizes and styles and colors of e-cigarettes. That is very true. They started on the market. E-cigarettes came to the US market in 2007. They weren't super popular with teens then. And we've seen some sort of up and down. 2014 went up again. And then we really saw a big uptick in the 2017 to 2019 times. That was largely due to Juul, which you probably know about. And then since then, we've had a proliferation of all kinds of e-cigarettes that have been on the market. Now, I want to talk briefly about the amount of nicotine that's in different forms of e-cigarettes. First, let's start with cigarettes. Presumably, you know that a pack of cigarettes has 20 cigarettes in there. So if you smoked an entire pack of cigarettes, you'd have 20 cigarettes. I'm not going to ask you to put it in the chat unless you want, but just take a second to think how much, and you won't get it from the slide. It's a bit of a trick question. How much nicotine do you think is in one cigarette? If you want to pop in the chat, great. I have a few pop quizzes. I like to play around a little bit, but keep you awake. But if you're cooking or eating or whatever, you don't have to. But I'll give you a second to think. How much nicotine is in one cigarette? All right, we got some brave souls. 1.1 milligram. All right, thank you, Ellen. Anyone else want to chime in on that? All right, I will tell you. So one cigarette has about 8 milligrams of nicotine. However, the amount that you inhale, the yield, is closer to what Ellen and Catherine put in there, between 1 and 2 milligrams. So even though cigarettes are still the most effective way to bring nicotine into your body, each cigarette really yields about 1 to 1.5 milligrams of nicotine. So if you were to smoke an entire pack of cigarettes, you'd get somewhere in the 22 to 25 milligrams of nicotine range. Now, Juul, which is not used as often with teens, but we still are seeing Juul being used. But I like to anchor to Juul because people are most familiar with it. Juul is and sorry, we're going to do a little math right now, math for dinner. And those of you who hate math, I apologize, but I'll make it simple. So we're looking at a Juul pod, which is just that little pod that has the e-liquid in there that you inhale. The aerosol comes from that. A Juul pod has 59 milligrams per milliliter. It's a 0.7 milliliter container. 59 times 0.7 gives you about 41.3 milligrams. Now, Juul used to say, they took it off their website since, but they used to say that the majority, at least 80% of what's in the Juul pod, you get into your body. Yay. So if you basically just simply do the math, you are looking at, if you were to inhale an entire pod of Juul, you would get somewhere in the 30 to 35, 37 milligrams of nicotine in there. So, sorry, about 41 milligrams of nicotine, you'd get somewhere around 35 to 37 cigarettes. Now, Vuse, which is very popular, it's the #1 selling e-cigarette right now across the country. That is a higher volume. That's about 90 milligrams of nicotine, so closer to about 80 cigarettes. And Elf Bar, which keeps changing their name to skirt regulation, is much more nicotine in there, much more volume, not more nicotine, much more volume. So you're looking at somewhere between 550 and 590 cigarettes worth of nicotine. Now, these are just math numbers. It's how much you actually inhale may be a little bit different. But my point is simply to say, when a young person is using an e-cigarette, whatever the form is, they are getting a tremendous amount of nicotine, more so than when they're just smoking a pack of cigarettes. Now, you might ask, well, how much nicotine is one using, or how many pods, or how many e-cigarettes? Well, I know from Juul, or in the Juul era, because we did some studies on this and some publications that showed that teens were using anywhere from a pod a week, which is about 2 or 3 cigarettes a day, to a pod a day. And then I anecdotally have talked to teens who have been addicted, had lung issues, all kinds of negative effects from using Juul and other e-cigarettes. And I've said, how much are you using? And they will tell me, now they're highly addicted, but they would say a pod a day to 4 pods a day. That is 1 to 8 packs of cigarettes worth of nicotine, depending on how you do the math. Huge amount. And then I've asked teens, well, what about Elf Bar? How much are you using there? And usually it's a couple thousand puffs, so it's usually not in one day, but within a couple few days, teens are using. So again, a tremendous amount of nicotine that these young people are getting into their systems. All right. So let's continue talking about some other products. I do want to mention a non-nicotine e-cigarette. So if you didn't know, you can vape your vitamins, you could vape your melatonin, and you could vape your caffeine, and so on. These look very much like nicotine e-cigarettes, but they don't have nicotine in them, and they don't necessarily have cannabis in them either. Some people call these wellness vapes. Please don't call them wellness vapes. They're anything but wellness. I don't mind if you're taking vitamins or melatonin or caffeine in liquid form or other forms, but when you inhale, you're getting a lot of the same chemicals that you get from other nicotine e-cigarettes. Not nicotine, but propylene glycol, glycerin, flavorants, which I'll mention a little bit later, but all kinds of other things. Inhaling itself is dangerous with these products and dangerous to your lungs. So if you're seeing these, be aware of what they look like. And by the way, these are not regulated at all. You can buy these. We were seeing them a lot in Urban Outfitters, which is a teen and young adult store. And they're not regulated, and there's no age gate or age restriction on these products. Now, oral nicotine, we're seeing a lot of oral nicotine products. You may have heard of some tablets like Velo. You can actually get nicotine toothpicks, Lucy gum. Now, Lucy gum is typically with teenagers, not being used as a replacement to help them stop smoking cigarettes, but more as a starter or in addition to other drugs that they might be using or other nicotine products. And then Zyn. As you probably have heard about Zyn, if not, big alert to listen and pay attention to Zyn. We are seeing Zyn more and more and more across the country and in California and in Marin. We published a paper not long ago that really showed that these products in general were being used, all of these different oral nicotine products were being used by about 20% of teenagers, including these oral nicotine pouches. And what we found in a subsequent study is that the majority of teens who are using an oral nicotine pouch are using Zyn. Now, what are these? Zyn are pouches. They're little pillow-like sacs, and they have nicotine in there. The nicotine is derived by tobacco, but the tobacco itself is not in there, which is why they're white pouches and not yellowed. But they have nitrosamines and other ingredients. They haven't been on the market very long, so a lot of studies haven't come out to tell us exactly what is in there. What you do is you put it in your gum, between your gum and your lip, and you absorb the nicotine that way. What we're finding is that, particularly we're hearing with teens, that they're using multiple Zyn at once, 2, 3, 4 at a time. They'll put it in, particularly in their upper gum. It's called upper decky is the term that's used. Now, if you're looking at a 6 milliliter amount, yeah, somebody's saying good for the brain. Thank you, Martha. Unfortunately, that is a lot where the ads are coming and the Zinfluencers, the influencers on this. And the problem is it is nicotine, and nicotine is addictive to the brain up until the mid-20s. And it's still a tremendous amount of nicotine. So 6 milligrams or 3 milligrams more than a couple of cigarettes, you might be, if you're having 3, 4, 5 at a time, you're having several cigarettes worth of nicotine. Now, you're not getting the chemicals from inhaling. I don't want to give that impression, but we're also worried that teens are starting with Zyn and moving on to other products as well. And Dr. Jeremiah Mock, who is in the audience, he's a professor at UCSF. He's been doing a lot of studies, garbology studies, where he's looking around in Marin County as to what they're finding, what kind of nicotine or cannabis products. And I'm going to show you a few pictures that he sent me, where these are in Marin County that you can see and being in and around schools. So here's just an example of Zyn and some of the pouches that were found. And here too, you can see the Zyn pouches are in and about right here. So the point is that we are seeing Zyn across the country in California and Marin, and just some quote proof that we're seeing these products in your backyards, in your schools, in your parks, and so on. So we are concerned about these products, and typical, they're so new that we're not sure of all of the negative consequences that might come from using Zyn, particularly at a young age. By the way, I didn't mention this when I was talking about e-cigarettes, nicotine. This is an equal opportunity problem, e-cigarettes. We are seeing, it doesn't matter what race, ethnicity you are, what your income is, whether your students are their top grades or struggling in school, students, teens, young adults are using electronic cigarettes. We're seeing a significant number of teens using, and it doesn't matter who you are. Not only that, it's not only a middle and high school phenomenon, but we're seeing elementary school students, second graders who are vaping. And they're getting it from their older siblings, they're getting it from friends, they're getting it maybe from their parents. They smell good, they taste good, they look good. So a tremendous number. So we are worried. And we don't know, we know the brain continues to develop to your mid-20s, but we don't know what happens if a second grader, an 8-year-old is using nicotine. It's not good. And it's something that we're very, very concerned about. All right, so just going back to Zyn, sorry for the flipping there. I do, and Kelsey, if you don't mind putting in the chat the resource link. So on our website, we have many, many, many infographics and resources. If you are a school teacher or a counselor or a physician or work in schools, recs, PE, whatever, these are free and completely available to you on our website. All we ask is that you keep our Stanford Reach Lab logo on there. But we do have different things for parents on the left and teenagers on the right, different pieces of infographics. We also have them on fentanyl. We have them on e-cigarettes. We're just about to put a bunch on there on cannabis. We have some of them on there for other oral nicotine products. So check those out and please feel free to use them. All right, so let's switch to cannabis products and talk about that. So there are a number of different cannabis products, all of which teenagers and young adults are using. So your inhaled, which are predominantly the ones on the far left, inhaled here are first of all, we've got your traditional, right here, your traditional blunts. And yes, teens are, even though they don't want to smoke cigarettes, they are smoking blunts. That's your standard, form of cannabis that we've had on for years. You also have blunts. Blunts are very popular amongst young people. Blunts are cigars that people remove the tobacco and add in the cannabis flower, or you can buy cigar wrappers and then wrap your cannabis that way. Now, the problem with these is you're getting kind of a double whammy. You're getting both as nicotine and some tobacco from the cigar leaf, and you are getting flower and the cannabis as well. So we're very concerned about the increase in addiction from both nicotine and THC, which is a psychoactive component in these. So something that we need to work on and talk to teens. And I've talked to a lot of parents who don't know about blunts, and teens are using and don't realize that they're using a combination of nicotine and cannabis. And then the bottom picture here is a spliff, which is a cigarette and flower in there. These have anywhere from 5, usually 20% THC. We'll talk about THC level in a minute. Now, dabbing is right here. Dabbing is a highly, highly concentrated THC that's usually in the form of a wax that gets melted down, and then you inhale the resulting aerosol, basically, or smoke that comes from it. The problem with dabbing is it's about 80% THC, tremendous amount of THC. We're seeing more and more young people and adults, but we're worried about the young people today, more and more young people in the emergency room because they have gotten sick from these. You're not going to die directly from these. You're not going to overdose. You could get hurt if you were driving or out a window doing something like that. Suicidality, other things we'll talk about in a minute. But you can get very sick from these. You also have your bongs, traditional. All right, the ones that are inhaled that I was just mentioning, those take somewhere around the 7 to 10 seconds from the time you inhale your lungs through your body into your brain. About 7 to 10 seconds to feel the effect of that. The other form that we worry about are edibles. Edibles are your, nothing new, your traditional brownies, cookies that are infused with cannabis. The problem, and then also gummies, which is newer. And unfortunately, I listen to sports all the time. I'm a huge sports fan. I often hear announcers saying, hey, let's go pop a gummy. And what they mean is a cannabis gummy, and that's normalizing these products to young people, which is very concerning. The other reason why gummies are concerning, I mentioned that the other products that you inhale, it takes a few seconds to feel the effects. Cannabis gummies go through the gut. They have to be digested and then they get to the brain. So it could take 20 minutes to a couple of hours to feel the effect. Well, what we've seen is that somebody will use the product, use a gummy or a brownie, and they're eating it and they don't feel an effect. And they think, I usually feel something within a few seconds. So they may take more and more. And by the time they feel the effect, they could be sick. It's also hard to know sometimes, especially if you're making cannabis edibles at home and you're mixing in the cannabis into a brownie, for example, you might have different amounts of cannabis in each bite or throughout the different brownies or cookies that you've made. So something that we need to also talk to our teenagers about. So I mentioned THC concentrations. THC concentration over time has gone up dramatically. These are data from 1995 to 2021. When I was a kid, we would have somewhere in the 3 to 5%. Now we're upwards of 15 to 20% THC. And then there's, again, the dabbing, that's 80%. Very high potency THC products. If you were to use one, and I think I have a slide on that, one joint today, it's equivalent to about 10 joints when I was a kid. So if you've used and your kid says, hey mom, hey dad, you used, well, it's not the same as when you were younger. It's just not your grandma's joint anymore. All right. Now we do have variations. Generally, what I was talking about is Delta 9, which is your traditional cannabis from the cannabis plant. But we're starting to see more and more variations on cannabis. So Delta 8 is a synthetic form of cannabis that is kind of like Diet Coke. Not really, it's much worse, but it's a light version of THC. So it is derived from often from the hemp plant. We'll talk about hemp a little bit more. You extract the THC and have a less potent form of it. And I'll show you some pictures where you will see Delta 8. The problem is if you're inhaling or eating multiple and lots of Delta 8, it could wind up giving you some of the same effects and the high that you would get from Delta 9 from traditional cannabis. Now, hemp. What is hemp? So you may have heard of hemp like burlap or fibers that you might get. So hemp is a plant in the botanical class of Cannabis sativa. It generally has, and as grown, has very low levels of THC. And it's used for fibers, creams, other goods. And it is legal in its natural form. All right. But the problem is that when the edible hemp is legal to sell and also use without an age limit when it is from raw hemp with THC that's less than 0.3. Then the problem is, and in California, inhaled hemp is illegal. But the problem that we're seeing is not this form of hemp. The issues are now from intoxicating hemp. So these are chemically altered from the hemp product to increase the THC levels and honestly to bring them closer to Delta 9, closer to the products I was starting to talk about a few minutes ago. And you can have them in inhalable and edible forms. The problem is because they are derived from hemp, and hemp is legal in the less than 0.3 amount, then the regulation of intoxicating hemp has been vague, and we've had many, many loopholes in California. This has been the problem. But the problem is that we are seeing a lot of intoxicating hemp in Marin. Thanks to a man who gave me some, or you guys who gave me some of these numbers, but we know that cannabis-related 911 calls are for young people under 18 have increased 93% between 2021 and 2022. And these are largely due to hemp, these intoxicating hemp that are being sold because they are under the radar. There's another law that is the farmers bill, I think it's called, and hemp is exempt from a lot of the cannabis regulations. And Marin youth have one of the highest rates of cannabis overall in California. And thank you to Melissa and Kelsey for sending me some pictures. These are pictures that are sold of Delta 8, Delta 9 hemp sold in, or an intoxicating hemp sold in stores in Marin. You could see more of the liquid form, Delta bears, rope candy, chocolates. This is Delta 8. You know, and when you look at these, I'm hoping that one of the messages you're seeing is, wow, these look like candy. If I were a parent, I am a parent of a 24 and 28-year-old. If I looked at these and I saw them in my kid's backpack, I would not realize right away, and maybe ever, that what my kid was using is a form of cannabis or cannabis. I might think that they're just eating candy. And that's not by accident. If we can attract young people early, we can get them addicted to the different products that they might be using. So these are very attractive to anybody, very attractive to young people, and easy to hide. So just a few more. You can see fruity cereal, ropes, and again, these look like if you went to a candy shop, that's what they would look like. So a lot of concern about these products. And then this is a photo from 3 Marin middle and high schools, all of the different combinations of both nicotine and cannabis products, it's all together, that have been caught amongst youth in these schools. And you can see a lot of Zyn, a lot of Elf Bar, a lot of Flume. Some of the more glassy styles tend to be the inhaled. And by the way, you can vape your cannabis as well. So we're seeing a lot more of that. So to help with the hemp that I mentioned, there is a new bill, California AB 2223, that was recently Governor Newsom put into action. It regulates hemp in a similar fashion that we regulate Delta 9 and cannabis in California. Now, cannabis is recreational and medicinal is legal in California. Prop 64 was passed to legalize cannabis. Hemp, again, has gone under the radar, but now hemp is going to be regulated as well. You must have a license to manufacture and sell hemp, and you cannot sell it if it has more than 1 milligram of THC. So really keeping it below the intoxication levels, and we're largely because we're so worried about young people getting a hold of these and using them, and basically stores selling them as if they're sorry, emergency. Thank you, Kelsey. I misspoke. It is an emergency regulation to get it off the market. It is not passed. We are looking into that more. And I should say I do sit on the Cannabis Advisory Committee, and it is something that we probably will be discussing as well in the state of California. So thank you for that correction. I'm sorry for misspeaking on that. All right. So if it isn't enough to have these products separate, let's talk about them together. So we're seeing more and more young people using both tobacco and cannabis together. So there are different ways when we talk about co-use. One is literally at the same time, like in the form of blunt that I had mentioned there. The other is that you could be, I've talked to teenagers who use their nicotine e-cigarette, about half of it, and then when they're done, they break it open, which you're not supposed to be able to do, but a simple YouTube search, and it's not very hard to figure out how to do that. And then they add in the cannabis oil. And one young person I talked to, a young guy, said, yeah, then I have a cherry flavored cannabis vape with nicotine. Very proudly, he said. So we're seeing a lot of co-use of these products at the same time. But you can also use cannabis and tobacco within a short period of time. This is often referred to as chasing. And oh, somebody's asking about the slides. Yes, if you email me or Kelsey, we're happy to send you the slides. Thank you. So when you're looking at them at the short period of time, it's called chasing. So you might use a cigarette or an e-cigarette nicotine and then follow it shortly after with cannabis and vice versa. And then sometimes people refer to co-using these products just means that you've used them over time within the same amount of same day or whatever. So when you're talking to young people and you're saying, are you co-using, which I probably wouldn't use that term with teens, but just be aware that co-use is very popular and that we need to be asking them. And it's also important, as I showed you with vaping e-cigarettes, it's really hard to know because they look very similar. Are young people using cannabis in there, nicotine, melatonin, and so on? So when you're talking to your teens, it's really important to really say, hey, I've learned about all kinds of products, and you're not selling it to them, you're not promoting it, but really to be honest and talking about it and reminding them that it doesn't matter what is in your e-cigarette. We're also just worried about you inhaling all of the products that are in there. So rates of co-use, we're seeing that co-use is very prevalent. Depending on the study, we just published a study on co-use. About 5 to 30% of adolescents and young adults are using both products around the same time, if not simultaneously. And a lot of studies, including ours, are showing that co-use is more prevalent than use of one product or the other separately. The study that we just published also showed that most teens were starting with nicotine and then moving to cannabis within a year or two. So what are some of the health effects? We know, and I'm going to kind of go through this, an overview of the effects of cannabis and tobacco. So some are combined, the same effects, and some depend on if you're talking about cannabis or tobacco. First of all, we know that the brain continues to develop until about age 25. So we also know that no matter what drug you're putting into your brain, nicotine, THC, any other drug can alter your brain and alter the brain development. It literally changes your brain and brain chemistry. We also, and that's why young people are so much more likely to become addicted than our adults because of the fact that our brains are developing and more mobile, more plastic during the time of adolescence and into very young adulthood. We also know that if you're using cannabis, that you can develop anxiety, paranoia, slowed reactions, poor memory. We know that if you're using nicotine, we also know that it could hurt academic achievement, academic performance, and have other issues around anxiety and depression. We also know that nicotine and cannabis can increase your heart rate. We know about lung inflammation. I'll tell you more about that. Cannabis, poor muscle control, coordination, imbalance, falling. That's why it's really important not to operate a car or other vehicles, bikes, machinery if you're high on cannabis. And then vomiting, which we'll talk about. So drugs addiction. A lot of people think that you cannot become addicted to cannabis. You can. About 1 in 6 teens are addicted if they're using on a regular basis. Impaired learning, memory, attention, etc., lower academic performance, lower IQ. We also know about sleep issues, that the higher the dose, the more likely you are to have a lot of these different impairments. And brain impairment does not resolve with abstinence. Some of these changes are permanent. We also know about tobacco and cannabis in the lungs. You're inhaling, whether it's smoke or the aerosol, that you're going to have inflamed airways, destroys the air sac in the lungs. And we also know that you're more likely to have a weaker immune response to infection. I've talked to quite a few physicians, more around nicotine e-cigarettes, who said, I won't perform elective surgery on a teenager who's been smoking or using e-cigarettes because I am worried about their ability to heal. So pulmonary effects, I mentioned flavors. So e-cigarettes, as well as whether you're using a THC or nicotine, have a lot of flavors in them, and I'll show you some pictures around that. But we know that the flavors in them themselves can cause damage to the lungs. There's something in the federal government called GRAS, generally recognized as safe for oral, but not inhalation. So you could take butter and you can eat butter or heat it to several hundred degrees and eat it. You might burn your tongue, but you can do that. But if you take it and you inhale it, we are very worried about lung lesions at that point. So that's something that we should really be aware of and talk to teens. And that's also important because this is the point when I talked about those non-nicotine e-cigarettes, that teens will say, it's just essential oils, whatever that means, or it's just, water vapor. Well, no, it's not, because even if there's no THC, no nicotine in there, just the flavors themselves, just the propylene glycol, the glycerin, a lot of other ingredients can be harmful to your health. Few other things about cannabis I want to mention. Cannabis hyperemesis syndrome. We see this a lot in the emergency rooms where a young person's vomiting and having severe abdominal pain that's caused by long-term use of cannabis. Now, the symptoms can ease in a few days if cannabis use has stopped, but it can resume if cannabis use continues. Mental health. We know that cannabis is associated with hallucinations, paranoia, depression, anxiety. Now, we also know that cannabis use is associated with 2 to 3 times increased risk of psychosis. And younger people, typically around that 19 to 21-year-old period, are more at risk for psychosis from cannabis. Now, some people say it's associated. I know a psychiatrist in the UK who's an expert in cannabis and mental health and psychosis, and he said that a lot more evidence is showing that cannabis causes psychosis. And I recently met a woman who's 25, now she's a little older, but 25, and I'm not saying this to scare you. I do not believe in scare tactics, or being hyperbolic, but it is an important story that she was 25. She had used cannabis once in a while. She was in Colorado, had used it once in a while. Occasionally she had to emphasize to me she bought it legally. She was 25. She was with her boyfriend. She did not feel the effects when they were using together. He did what's called packing. He just put in more and more and more cannabis into a bong. She took a hit, so packed it down. She took a hit, and I don't know if it was one hit or two, but it immediately caused her to have a psychotic break. She took a knife and she killed her boyfriend. She killed her dog. She's hearing impaired, and she started to kill herself. The police came, stopped her. She did get arrested, and she was convicted of murder. But the judge said, and you can see it from the police camera, that she was clearly not herself. She did not recognize what was going on. She did not know that she had a knife. She was completely out, completely gone in what she was doing. And so the judge actually gave her 3 years of probation, and she's actually going to start telling her story to help people understand. But psychosis is real. It's not huge prevalence, but it's real. We also have cannabis and suicidality. In youth and young adults, cannabis can be associated with increased suicidal ideation and suicidal attempts. All right, second and third hand smoke. With nicotine e-cigarettes, we know, and you may have heard of secondhand smoke with cigarettes, that plume of aerosol that comes out has different ingredients in there that can be harmful to the person next to you, even if you're not using e-cigarettes, other people. In that big plume has been shown to have nicotine, heavy metals, ultrafine particles, cancerous chemicals, and volatile organic chemicals. So just that plume that comes out can be harmful to people around you. There's also third hand smoke and aerosol. Well, and this is true, by the way, for cannabis, which I'll show you in a second, but that plume is out there. It's got to go somewhere. It mixes with the chemicals in the air and then falls to the ground. It can be on the carpet, couches, sweaters, walls, and so on. And so that can be toxic as well. Cannabis also has secondhand smoke. We know that it has 33 chemicals on the Prop 65 list of toxins. We know that it can be harmful to the cardiovascular system. There are a number of studies, especially in Colorado, where we had earlier legalization of cannabis, that children who are near a cannabis user smoking or vaping can be harmful to their bodies. And I think of this often as a social justice issue. When we're talking about whether this is nicotine or cannabis, when you are using in a multi-unit housing, apartments or work dwellings and so on, that it can go through the walls, the vents, etc. So even if you're not smoking, but your neighbor is, it could be going through the walls and harming you as well. All right. Why do youth use? And I know we're getting on time. Youth use for a number of different reasons, and we can't go through all of these today, but I'm going to point out a few. Flavors and marketing. When you look at this, these are nicotine e-cigarette juices or e-liquid that is then poured in to the e-cigarette device. These are not for us adults. These are squarely attracting our young people. And I'm hoping that you'll see these and just be appalled, because this is ridiculous that we let these kinds of products on the market. And these down here, Sour Patch, we also have cannabis products that look just like that. Here's just some examples of the cannabis flavors that are available. E-cigarettes right now, particularly nicotine, are coming in just egregious shapes that are clearly being meant to hide from you parents. So we've got ones that are highlighters. This actually is it's called highlight to get you high. It writes as a highlighter, but in there it is hiding the e-cigarette. You've got all these other shapes that look like household products. They look like toys. They could be a McDonald's, but kids box, they just look like toys, but they are e-cigarettes. You've got Minions, you've got Gloomy Bears, and then what you do is you inhale from the top, and that is where the vapor comes, or the aerosol. You've got them in boba style. It is endless. And then most egregious recently come out are these e-cigarettes that are video games. And I just heard, I don't have a picture of it, but I just heard about one that you have, sort of like we used to have Pet Rocks or some of these other toys. I can't remember what they were called, that if you put it down, it dies. There are now games like that. And the only way to keep your pet alive is to vape. So this is just a ridiculous issue that we are seeing. And I'm hoping you are getting Tamagotchi. Thank you, Amanda. I'm hoping that you're getting angry, because you should be. These are not attracting us adults. These are squarely attracting our kids. Again, more for youth. All right, a really quick pop quiz. Put in the chat. What is the legal age to purchase tobacco and cannabis? Don't be shy. Put it in. All right, we got some 18s, some 21s. Keep going. I can take a couple more. All right, 18, 21, 13, 18, 21. All right, all right, all right. You need to know it's 21 for tobacco, and it's also 21 for cannabis. Let me talk about tobacco for a second. All tobacco, all nicotine is 21. California passed tobacco 21, T21 in 2016. It became the law of the land across the country in December of 2019. You have to be 21. Now, a paper just came out yesterday that we published. Kelsey and Melissa, please remind me, I can get it for you. I forgot about that one. And we are just about to launch some new infographics on this to help you know this. And I take some blame as somebody in public health, but we in government, we in the FDA, California, have done a bad job getting this information out there. It is 21. And in the paper we just published, we showed that about 40% don't realize that it's 21. That's a sizable proportion of people. And this is important. New parents should be vigilant about this. There are vape shops, 7-Elevens, different stores selling tobacco and cannabis to people under 21 and under 18. In my neighborhood, we've seen it and we've reported it. So it's really important. And the more you know about this, the more it's going to change the social norms. The reason for 21 is the brain development. I know brains continue to develop till 25, but with one exception, if you want to pop in the chat, you might know, most policies are very difficult to say till 25. It becomes a little too paternalistic. I was actually on the committee, the Institute of Medicine National Academies Committee, a federal committee that looked into what age should we raise at the federal level, whether it should be, we made it 18, go to 19, 21, or 25. And we made the recommendation to the feds to be 21 because you didn't have much difference in health effects and reducing use if you go to 25. We did big models, statistical models. And that's because if you're 16, you have 18-year-old friends. If you have 16, you don't have a lot of 21-year-old friends. So 21 seemed to be that sweet spot. But again, the brain continues to develop until you're 25. The message here, by the way, is not, oh, you're 21, go have a good time and use, or you're 25. It's still, even if the brain is done developing or we're less worried about addiction, we're still worried about lungs and heart and other health effects. So 21. That's why when we see signs like this, and this is in the Bay Area, that says student discounts, the majority, I went to school forever. I'm still in school in some ways, but the majority of people stopping in school by 22, right? College age. When you say student discounts, the majority of students are under the age of 21. This is attracting our kids, and this needs to stop. All right. So summary and then some resources. We have a perfect storm to addict young people. We've got stealth, youth-focused products, Tamagotchi. We've got flavors. We've got things that are purposely packaged so you can't see them. You can't tell what they are. There have been videos and studies showing that little kids see those products and think that they're candy and that they're for them. And by the way, because of the flavors, they smell good. And when something smells good, one assumes that it is healthy and not bad for you. I often tell parents, if your kid's room smells like strawberries, bananas, mangoes, and blueberries, it's probably not fruit salad. It's probably something that we should be concerned about. So very, very easy to hide products. We've got very high potency THC. We've got hemp products, intoxicating hemp, Delta-8 that are trying to scoot under the legal and regulatory system that thankfully in California, we're trying to do something about it, but it is a huge problem. We've got high nicotine levels. We have no standards in the US for nicotine. The UK only allows 1.7%, about a third, half to a third of the milligrams that we have in a lot of e-cigarettes. There is no upper limit for nicotine and really no upper limit right now for THC. It is just an endless market and we need to do something about that. We also have teens, and I didn't bring in all the data because I would have gone on for 2 hours, but perceptions, teens, hopefully I've taught you something. Teens still continue to think that these are harmless water vapor. We're going to hear from youth in a little bit, but and feel free to call me out on anything you don't agree with. I love having the dialogue with younger people, but a lot of misperceptions, a lot of lack of understanding of these products. They come in flavors. The packaging is super cool. And Monica, yes, I should mention that. It is illegal to sell flavors in California. And I actually, not to toot my horn, but testified and was one of the lead people to testify on behalf of Senate Bill 793 to help get that passed, that then went to the voters as Prop 31. Unfortunately, if you remember back to that picture I showed early of the products that teens are using, those are all flavors, and those were confiscated this year. The loopholes in 793, the fact that people are still selling them, they're getting through the mail, they're getting it in different ways. And I'd love to hear from our young person about that as well. It is illegal, but teens are still getting them and they're still using them. And then packaging and ads, and they're harmful. So what can we do? So it's really important that we have honest drug education, not hyperbolic, not scaring young people, but honest drug education that's based in science. And it's based in how teens learn and make decisions. Teens don't think just about risks, and if they do, it's the social risks. Teens are often saying, "Ooh, I don't want to hurt my boyfriend, or I don't want to be dissed by my friends. I want to look cool." It's the social aspects that are really important. When we tell teens, and we teach them, and we should teach them about nicotine in the brain and heart and lung, and our curriculums do that. But we also need to say, "Hey, you're being duped. Hey, you're being targeted by the industry. Do you really want to give all that money to the industry?" We need to be talking about the things that they care about today, like sports. Do you know it's harder to play sports if you use these drugs? That we're not just talking about lung cancer in 20 years, or we're not talking about heart attacks in 20 or 30 years. That's not what teenagers care about. We need to talk to them about the here and now. We also ultimately need to keep young people safe. What do I mean? Of course, we want to give messages about not using. Most important, best way to keep yourself safe is not to use. But if a teenager is using, we need to help them understand the ways to keep them safe. Not drinking and driving, not using cannabis and driving, not using these products alone. If they are using cannabis, to be aware of the dose that you are using. Yes, you can report vendors. We should talk about that at the end. So anytime you go into a classroom, if you're a teacher on this Zoom meeting, or anytime you go into a group, or parents, you as well, you have to think about the continuum of use. You in any given group or any given individual, depending on the drug, are going to have people and individuals who have never used, who've used once in a while, all the way to dependence and substance use disorder, and everything in between that. When you go into a classroom, or when you talk to your kids and you say, "Of course you've never used," you shut them down. And this is based on research. The core of my work is adolescent decision making. You shut them down. They say, "You're not talking to me. You don't want to listen to me." None of us want our kids to be using drugs. But I personally, as a parent, would much rather know my teen is, and to get the truth out over time, may not happen overnight, so that way I can figure out ways to help them. That is the most important thing. So not shutting down the conversation and not making assumptions. So the goal is to normalize drug education and communication, not drug use. We have a conversation, not a confrontation, not a lecture. So go home. If your kids are with you, great. If not, go home, or when done with dinner. My rule was never after 10 o'clock at night, though. Witching hours for teenagers, don't have those conversations. Maybe not after 9:30. That was my rule. But find the right time. So I just listened to a talk. Can we discuss what we learned together? Not saying you don't use, and not saying do you use. Can we have a conversation together? Can we learn together? So it's QR code, and Kelsey can pop in the chat our website, my Reach Lab website. There's a QR code there. Everything is on. It's 100% free. I'm not selling you anything. We have curriculums, everything from prevention to education to interventions. We have tobacco prevention and You and Me Together Vape Free. We have the cannabis prevention, Smart Talk. We have Safety First and Healthy Futures. Safety First, I'll say in a second. Healthy Futures. Healthy Futures is thank you for putting those links in the chat. Healthy Futures. I'm really hoping if you're in schools, that schools are finding and looking as to whether students are using. They're using in the bathroom. They're using in the parking lots. They're hiding it in classrooms and so on. We need to be vigilant, and we need to help. Now, there is a new policy that passed in California that you cannot suspend teens or students for vaping and using, and I actually agree with that. What we need to do is help them and move them towards quit. Safety First. Safety First is one of our curriculums as well. It is 13 lessons that covers everything. all drugs in 13 different lessons. Safety First is a curriculum that most, if not all, of the teachers in Marin have been trained and have been using. So ask your students about it, ask your teachers about it. There's a link in the chat about this that you can look up, but this really does go through all the different drugs, helps teens not use, and if they are using, help them quit or be safer. And I'm just going to end with our 6th annual conference. We do a whole 2-day conference virtual in my lab for teachers, parents, healthcare providers, you name it. More information is coming soon. I will say this is the only thing we do charge for, $125 or $150 if you're past the deadline. But it's about 50 workshops and keynoters. We have somebody from the Feds, SAMHSA coming, so please consider that. Follow us on social media, particularly if you want to say something nice. The tobacco industry hates us and hates me, so having a periodic plug is a nice thing. And then there's my, forgetting that, sorry, that should come out, but there's my email if you have any questions. Thank you so much for listening, and I hand it back.
Thank you so, so much, Dr. HALPERN-FELSHER. That was incredible. I learned a ton. I was scribbling down notes the whole time, and I'm sure our listeners were as well. So thank you. And everyone who's still joining us, please feel free if you have a question that pops into your head that you'd like to ask, please feel free to drop it into the chat. We're keeping an eye on it and keeping kind of a running list of some questions. I know Dr. HALPERN-FELSHER was so good about answering questions as we were going, but we've been catching a couple extras that we'll use for our Q&A discussion later. So thank you so much again. With that, I will actually pass it on to our second speaker. I will be introducing GABRIELLE BEYER, who is a TAM high school senior and is an intern with Youth Transforming Justice. So with that, I'll hand it over to GABRIELLE.
Thank you so much, Molly. That's going to be really tough to follow. That was such an amazing presentation. I'm just here to give a little bit of insight about the youth perspective, and about the outcomes for youth cited for the possession of cannabis products. So I'm a senior at TAM, and I've seen how prevalent cannabis products are among my peers and how schools often struggle to address the problem on campus. So to better understand what's been tried to solve this issue, I sort of asked myself what happens to students when they're busted at school for cannabis possession. And I went through some of the handbooks, and I learned that the answer to that actually varies by school district. So basically, generally, schools try to follow California Education Code 48900 EC, which says that it permits public school students to be suspended or recommended for expulsion if they possess drugs. But this, of course, is only sometimes followed. So how do each schools respond? So each school district has its system for responding to substance abuse, with many schools kind of operating on a case-by-case basis. So they tailor their approach to fit the specific circumstances and the need of the student involved. So at my school, if a student appears under the influence, they're usually sent to the nurse's office for a health evaluation or referred to an administrator's office to face disciplinary action. So usually first offenses involving small amounts of marijuana may result in up to 5 days of suspension from school and activities, or 10 days from sports and extracurricular activities. And repeated offenses and more significant amounts of cannabis can lead to expulsion. Additionally, the district collaborates with agencies that specialize in substance abuse counseling. So that could be YTJ. Usually if students are sent to youth court, they collaborate with someone. So this is a really short presentation. Feel free to ask me any questions about the youth, how youth access cannabis. I'm here. So that was really short, but I hope you all enjoyed that.
Thank you so much, GABRIELLE. That was incredible. It's really interesting, especially how it does vary so much. And so we are very interested to hear maybe a little bit more, but I know, oh, everyone's thanking you. You did a wonderful job.
Thank you
So
guys so
please
much.
feel free, oh, sorry, Gabrielle. Please feel free to drop questions into the chat for either of our incredible speakers. Um, I did want to actually ask one question to Dr. HALPERN-FELSHER, because I think what was incredible about your presentation is you gave us really tangible things and ways to start these important conversations with teens and tweens at home. And so one of my questions was, what is something that maybe we can do in our broader communities, or even possibly at like a state level in terms of advocacy or policy work? Like, what other action steps might we be able to take?
Do you have about an hour? There are a lot. The flavor ban that somebody mentioned, Senate Bill 793, Prop 31, enforcement. And somebody asked, could you report? Yes, you can. You can report. So, and you people in Marin, I'm not in Marin, probably have a better sense of where to report, but please do report shops that are selling to flavors or just anything to under 18, under 21, and selling flavors to anybody. We need enforcement, but we also need education. And like I said, a lot of people don't even know about a lot of these laws, including the tobacco 21 and cannabis 21. So some of it's education, getting a group of people to go and knock on doors. We did that where I live when we passed a flavor ban to go educate the retailers, and then get to citing. You certainly can do that. And then, so that's one thing. The other is these THC I mean, I love the hemp regulation that we hope really goes at the state level. I've been working with the California Department of Public Health on some regulations, and again, California Advisory Committee at the state level as well that I got appointed to. So hoping to be doing something around THC and THC and cannabis flavors, but THC levels, the fact that we've got 20%, 80% THC is ridiculous. Hemp and Delta 8 that's often skirting regulation is also something that we should be advocating for or against the skirting of regulation and regulating their nicotine levels just are off the chart. That is a problem. The other is, and I think there was something about this in the chat, just making sure also that we have smoke-free air laws. So not being able to smoke cigarettes or use e-cigarettes or cannabis, inhale cannabis in any indoor space or parks and beaches and so on. So that's another thing that you could do. The other is, working with your schools. Gabby was saying, but making sure that your schools are paying attention to these products, are paying attention and having resources for young people, having resources for parents to help them quit. These products are so highly addictive and they kind of came from nowhere. So we need a lot of help for young people who are just screaming for help and are addicted. So that's a few.
Thank you so much. I think those are incredible action items that we can take, because it's so important, obviously, to be having these conversations at home. But I think there are lots of folks who are excited and motivated to be taking further action as well. So thank you so much for sharing some of those. I did have a question for Gabrielle. One question that came up was, do you have any insight into where students might be accessing flavored tobacco or cannabis products?
Yeah, I don't have any stats, professional stats, but from my own personal opinion, from what I've seen, it's mainly fake IDs. That's a big thing. I think that people get them from their friends, older siblings. I've seen a lot. Usually other students from social media, like Snapchat. I've seen people post on their stories, they disappear in 24 hours, saying, I'm selling this, I'm selling that. And students will swipe up and contact the person, they'll meet up. Honestly, it's not something crazy like drug dealers anymore. It's kind of student on student, student older siblings. Not really a lot of adult student interaction unless it's in a professional setting like a drugstore. They're using a fake ID. So that's what I've seen. Great question, though. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gabrielle. Oh, Dr. Halpern-Felsher, please.
But I was just gonna, I saw a question in the chat, which I appreciate. Thank you so much, about the medical marijuana. I'm not dissing medical marijuana. My husband's an oncologist and has used it, and has had patients with cancer use medical marijuana. I almost wanted to get it for my mom 2 years. She passed away 2 years ago tomorrow, and was thinking about it for her. So there are circumstances under which, but we're talking today, at least I was talking today, about recreational, not medical, and young people who are using it to get high, using it for other reasons. Yes, for depression, but typically young people who are using cannabis and depression, cannabis is enhancing their depression and anxiety, not lowering it. So, but I am certainly not talking about people who are using for medical reasons. Just want to make that clear.
Thank you for that question, or answering that question. I did actually want to send you another one, Dr. Halpern-Felsher, if you don't mind. I know there are a couple more coming in and we're keeping an eye on it, but I wanted to ask this one as well, about like just kind of parental permissiveness around cannabis, maybe in particular, and how you might recommend folks, initiate conversations with other adults about this, this information, especially when some parents might be feeling that, cannabis is maybe, quote, better than alcohol. Do you have any recommendations for those conversations?
Well, if I'm understanding the question correctly, if you're a parent here listening, I hope that you do take back some of this and start a conversation and say, I originally thought it wasn't that much of an issue, but right now I'm starting to realize, hey, maybe I am concerned about addiction. I am concerned about brains. I am concerned about brain development. I am concerned about a lot of the other health effects, some of which I didn't even get to talk about. So, and certainly there are also adults who are using well beyond 25. It's different. Your brains are developed. You may be using it once in a while, and you're an adult. You have that decision-making capacity. We're talking about young people who don't have all that decision-making capacity and who are using often to get high, and often in ways that could really hurt their brain. By the way, your lungs continue to develop till 25 or so as well. Not a lot of people realize that. So my point there is that it's really, I just hope that this is a conversation starter, that you all start spreading the word that there are concerns, legitimate concerns about cannabis, legitimate concerns about co-use, and it shouldn't be something that we are permissive about. We should be having those conversations and not condone, not endorsing young people using.
Thank you so much. And actually, there's a follow-up to that question for Gabrielle. The question is, what do you think about that question? And are your peers saying that their parents are, quote, okay with using alcohol or cannabis?
I think that there has been a rise in permissiveness in terms of parents' reactions to their kids using substances. Obviously, parents aren't letting their kids, do hard drugs anymore, but I do believe some parents are letting their kids drink alcohol, smoke, because they think it's just a part of, being a teenager. That's how it was when they were young, maybe in the 70s. But, there's always that secondary education that schools give. But, if the parents are saying it's okay, then the kids are going to believe it's okay. So if that answers the question at all.
Thank you,
I
Gabrielle.
love it, Gabby. Molly, there is one question that just went to me personal, a chat that I should answer out loud, and
Yes,
another one,
please.
if I may. So there were two. One is about the retailers. John asked, so you're absolutely right. Thank you. There's something called PUP laws, possession, use, and purchase. So the Senate Bill 793, Prop 31, and all the other bills, that actually Senate Bill 793 is only for the sellers. You're absolutely correct. So and this is important to know this, if you are a teenager who is caught using, you might get in trouble for other reasons, but it really is at the point of the seller, not the user. And in fact, for better or for worse, 793 does not include citations for teenagers. It used to. We used to have that, but Prop 31 Senate Bill 793 does not. So it is, you are not cited as a teenager or anybody if you are using. The reason why I want to emphasize this is, as you could probably imagine, I am in favor of the federal government getting rid of flavors and getting rid of menthol. So menthol is put into e-cigarettes and really more into cigarettes to mask the flavors. Basically, as my friend says, helps the poison go down easier. And it's often used, menthol, to attract people of color. And I've been part of groups to really try to ban the manufacturing of menthol. And there's been some concern that a young person or somebody coming across the border would have menthol cigarettes or menthol e-cigarettes and would get arrested. It is not a possession, use, or purchase. It is a manufacturing in that case. So this is really important for people to realize. And then there was a chat to me directly, how to talk to kids who say they use marijuana for stress. So I touched on stress, but not enough. Thank you for saying that. We have a whole section in our curriculum, a couple of different lessons on there, in our curriculum on stress and coping. We have box breathing. And by the way, our curriculums are in Spanish as well. Safety First is not, it's too big. We haven't been able, but it's in the process of being translated. But our other curriculums and resources are in Spanish. We have a whole lesson in Safety First and in our other curriculums on stress and coping. And in fact, Marcia, who just put something in, Dr. Marcia Zaria is in my lab, was largely responsible for creating this particular lesson. And really good information on box breathing, on other ways to cope with stress, and really help young people acknowledge that they're stressed. There's good stress and bad stress, helping young people realize one is to acknowledge stress and know that if you are stressed out, and Gabby, I'd love your thoughts on this as well, recognizing that we are stressed, and stress, even bad stress, we just not just need to cope with it. I don't mean like just deal with it. I don't mean that. I mean helping young people learn to cope with it through healthy ways. That's not drugs. So whether it is exercising, watching movies, healthier eating, going out with friends, hanging out with friends, whatever it might be, that it's really important that we do that. So we really need to help them. And you're absolutely right. The person who put that in the chat to me privately, this generation is so stressed out with what's going on in the world, in the country, with pandemic still lurking, and socialization issues and stuff. So we need to just be honest with teenagers and really, really work with them to help them deal with their stress in other ways. Gabby, I would love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, totally. I've seen a lot of people saying that, using cannabis as an escape, smoking weed to release stress. Honestly, I found that most of those people tell me that it doesn't help to soothe them. It actually makes their anxiety go up, which is odd. It has that weird paradoxical effect. But yeah, people do use it as an escape. I don't know the solution, to be honest. I know that how I would want to be talked about it is I would just want someone to tell me that I guess that there are other ways to relieve stress. I mean, just talking through it, talking to a school counselor about it, really helps because you're basically a free therapist for you to some extent. Talking to friends about it, watching movies, watching a show, having downtime, talking to your teachers about ways to relieve stress. Obviously, they're mandated reporters, so, you're not supposed to tell them that. But yeah, that's probably how I would want to be talked to about it. Also, I got a question, what are the best ways to educate youth who have parents who are permissive with using alcohol or cannabis? I've heard from teachers that it's a struggle. Yeah, that's a toughie. So I think that people my age do have that boundary between home and school education where, if they're taught one thing at home, that's what they're going to take. And if they're taught another thing at school that's opposite, I don't think usually when they conflict, the knowledge they take from home, overrides the other one. I think that it's hard for teachers and schools to get kids to want to learn about the consequences or to want them to get educated about it. And I think that, I mean, this is really hard to answer. I think that just educating the parents like we're doing now, because, that permissiveness, sometimes it doesn't work. And what the school is teaching doesn't work. So it really just boils down to the parents. So yeah. And that goes out to all of you guys. Thanks for being here. So yeah.
And Gabby, just to clarify, the mandated reporting, and this is important for parents to know, but also, and I thought that was a fantastic, I love Gabby for president. I love it. I agree. That was a great answer. The mandated reporting is not if it is if you're suicidal. It's not if you're using drugs. And so you can, for anybody, go to a counselor in California and many states, sexual reproductive health, depression, anxiety, and mental health issues and drug use fall under sensitive services. So you can go, and parents, I know you would love to know if your kiddos are suffering from any of the above, but most important is that we get people some help if they're struggling. And so you can do that through your school counselors and through other ways that is confidential, school-based health centers, and so on. So that's important to know, including counseling to help you quit, which is also important to know.
Yeah. So sorry, I slipped up. That was my mistake. Thank you so much, Dr. Welsh, for clarifying.
No. I'm glad that you brought that up. I think it's really important. Now, I'm also a mandated reporter. Mandated reporters, if you tell us that you're going to hurt yourself, someone else, or someone's hurting you. But that's not depression. You can go and say you're depressed. It's at the point where you say that you might hurt yourself. That's when somebody is a mandated reporter.
Right. Absolutely. And then just like passing that knowledge on to your kids, because I didn't know that. And I've done research. So if I were to ever use drugs, I wouldn't know who to talk to. I would think that my teachers were going to report me, I was going to get in trouble, or that the counselor was going to report me and I was going to get in trouble. And so good to know that that's not a thing. So just letting kids know they don't have to talk to a parent. Exactly. I mean, they should. You should feel comfortable talking to your parent, obviously. But if that ever doesn't work, just letting your kids know that there are people they can talk to that are not mandated reporters in that sense.
The other thing quickly, sorry, Molly, we're having it back and forth here.
No, this is great. Please keep going.
I was just gonna say the other thing quickly is, Gabby, along those, you said something really, really important for parents and you to tell people is there are wonderful Good Samaritan laws in California. If you kiddos, teenagers, and adults are with a friend who passes out due to drug of choice, whatever it might be, including fentanyl, including alcohol, including anything, you call the police, you call 911, you are not going to get cited, you are not going to get into trouble. You may have your drugs confiscated, but that is it. The law says we need to protect people and save a life. We're not worrying about what is on your possession at the time. So that is another really important message that we need. If you find a friend who is passed out and you think it might be from drugs or anything, just call 911 and do Narcan and other, that's a different talk. But please.
Thank you so much for mentioning that. That was something I wanted to make sure we all talked about tonight as well. Just, for parents to remind their teens of, and our teens on, also to be educating their peers on. So we have just 2 minutes left, and I have one last question for Gabrielle. One question did come in, if you could speak a little bit about Youth Transforming Justice, and in particular their youth court program, restorative programs. I know it's going to be maybe a bigger question than we bargained for, but we'd love to hear a little bit about your work with Youth Transforming Justice.
Sure. So I worked with them over the summer. It's a really wonderful program. I'm also part of the Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention Commission. It's a really wordy organization, but basically a little bit about youth court is that it's a kind of like a secondary court for students that get cited for substance related offenses. So they get to be heard by other peers. Sorry, that's kind of unclear. Honestly, I don't really know how to describe it, but what you need to know is that it is very helpful to people that have been cited for substance offenses. And there's, I don't know, one really quick question about have you heard peers decline offers to vapes or use edibles? I'm going to be really quick, 30 seconds. What do they say that doesn't make them feel uncool? Okay, yeah. So actually, I've been in this position a ton of times. If you're at a party and someone offers a vape, I think the coolest, I mean, I, I think what you got to say is just like, sorry, like, I don't do that. I'm good. I'm good. Maybe not tonight. Just say like, not tonight. I'm not in that mood right now. Um, there are definitely ways to go about it without being like a nerd or, being labeled as kind of dorky by your friends, if that's what people are worried about. Yeah, just be like, not tonight. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Gabrielle, for answering both of those questions and like right at time. You did a wonderful job. So I wanted to thank everybody. I know this was just an incredible discussion. It was such a wonderful way to kick off this series for this year. I want to thank our incredible speakers. I don't know about you, but I'm like so energized and inspired by both of your work. And so I want to thank you on behalf of everyone on the call still. I wanted to be sure to shout out, please complete the post-event survey. We'd love to hear your feedback. And again, as a reminder, 2 lucky attendees will receive $25 DoorDash gift cards. And thank you all so much for coming tonight and participating in this discussion. And we look forward to seeing you at the next one. So have a wonderful evening.